So it is a great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker. Vicky Angelaki is professor in comparative literature at Mid-Sweden University. She has previously held positions at Birmingham, Reading. She has done her studies at Royal Holloway and Thessaloniki. Vicky has a wide range of research interests. I was trying to sort of see how they can be grouped together. So there would be literature, theatre, and performance as they intersect with society and politics. It would be environmental humanities, critical theory, translation and adaptation, visual forms of representation. I'm sure I'm missing some, but as I say, she has a very wide range of interests. She is the author of many publications, including 5 monographs on contemporary British theatre, theatre and environment, and on the playwright Martin Crimp. She's also the co-editor of a book series, Adaptation in Theatre and Performance. And the title of her lecture today, Contemporary Crises and the Classical Canon, Staging Intersectional Eco-Theatres. Vicky, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, Pantelis. Thank you so much for this very, very kind invitation, this very warm welcome. All the organization and planning that has gone into this event, Florencia that's sitting right there, and everyone I've been in contact with over these past few months, it's been really exemplary. So I want to say I really appreciate this. I hope that you can hear me okay. I want to thank you for being here in this very warm weather. We'll talk more about that, and we've been talking about that. I'm going to try and keep this to not much more than 50 minutes because I'd like your picnic dinner to not become a midnight dinner. And also, I just really want to acknowledge, I can't see you, but I really want to acknowledge those colleagues and people that are joining us online from different parts of the world. So thanks so much. I've received messages from friends that I know are online right now, and it means the world to me. So thank you. Off we go. So I am a comparatist. I'm a theatre scholar. I am a person with a strong interest in the environment and a scholar that finds that the most enduring, resilient thread across all aspects of my research is precisely the environment, not only as theme, but as method. The environment is a method. So I've been very fortunate to have received recently a grant from Vitterhetsakademin in Sweden and the Yale Fund specifically that enabled some research time at the Swedish Institute of Classical Studies in Rome. I've in fact come straight from Italy just a couple of days ago. So while in Rome at the Swedish Institute, which does a lot of really important work on art history and archaeology and also older Swedish literature, which is what I was studying there. So that's what I mean, the environment is intersecting thread. I couldn't possibly not reflect on archaeology. I couldn't possibly extricate myself from that context. So this is really what provides the thread today. So on theatre archaeologies, gentle excavations against forgetting. I'm going to talk about these productions. Some of these productions are quite some time ago now. One of them, Cruel and Tender, is over 20 years ago. 20 years is a long time in theatre, a short time in archaeology. But precisely because it's important not to forget, I'm going to do some digging into what has already been there, but what we need to look at always from new perspectives, given the challenges that we have today. The beautiful thing about this room is that you know the plays, so I'm not going to summarize the plots. And I can take certain things for granted, and I'll avail myself of that so that I can stick to time. So off we go then. And just before we begin, I'm running on the principle that a play is an adaptive creature, and it is very much linked not only to its content and context of origin, but also to the ecologies of staging, to the environments, geographical, social, and of course theatrical, that presented with new iterations in each new performance or revival. So these are the shows. I've been thinking a lot about scale. I'm Greek, and when you grow up in Greece, I grew up in Thessaloniki. It's a very rich city archaeologically. When you grow up in Greece, you run a little risk of becoming a little bit complacent because antiquity is always there, history is always there. In Thessaloniki, we have a metro now. People who know Thessaloniki as a context, I'm sure have many thoughts on that, right? But there was a lot of digging that happened when the metro was being created that has led to interesting presentations of antiquity, so in the stations. So in any case, always, always there. So I thought I don't want to be complacent about history. While doing my research in Italy, I had the great pleasure of experiencing different archaeological sites because I had to for that other project I'm working on at the moment, but also because I really wanted to. And one of those extraordinary spaces was the Archaeological Museum of Naples, where I encountered this series of artworks. So danzatrice, that's of course singular, the dancer, the female dancer, but also the daughters of Danaos. So Aeschylus were already there, the suppliant women. And this is, I thought, quite a beautiful way of setting up the tone of this talk in terms of scale. Look at them looking at you. Look at their beautiful movements. I'm going to be talking about adaptations of this play by two very important contemporary playwrights. And of course, the slides are very happily shared with you if you want them. David Greig. I'm not going to dwell too much on this first part of the talk because we'll go into Martin Crimp in a moment. So I'd like to have a few minutes on each of these productions. These are The Suppliant Women by David Greig. Here at the Young Vic Theatre, of course, the play begins in 2016 as a production. It's a touring production directed by Ramin Gray. And the important thing about this production, the designer, of course, is Lizzie Clahan, I should also say that. The important thing about this play and production is that it draws on professional actors, but also on the community where it is staged each time. So as the director of the production put it at the time, women are recruited and trained to be in the chorus, and we see them there. So the lead, of course, is someone who is professional. Around her, other women who are performing these Danaids, the daughter of Danaos, in transit, to escape forced marriage, but encountering landscapes and harsh climates that they document very beautifully in their speeches throughout this text. And of course, we see here branches, we see very coordinated chorus movement. This was a really gorgeous production, really powerful. It coincided, of course, completely with Me Too. That's when all of this was happening. So that's an important context in itself. But geopolitically, this is a very important show because they talk a lot about cow Io. Now, Io does not begin life as a cow, begins life as a woman, becomes a cow, to escape, is transformed into a cow to escape the wrath of Hera because she has been the lover of Zeus. So she is crossing fields and valleys and is forever pursued by different elements of nature. And all of that is captured very beautifully by these women who seek sanctuary in the city of Argos, calling on their historical right to that land, drawing on that female ancestor. Climate, as I say, landscape, really extraordinarily captured in detail by Greig in his adaptation. He works from a literal translation, and he produces this text that elevates very much the female voice in a very bare production. As I say, plays are adaptive to their environments. I saw this show not at the Young Vic, but with different performers in Dublin. And when I saw this production in Dublin, it was in the lead up, it was the months leading up to the repeal referendum, a woman's right to choose, the abortion referendum. So when I heard the very important words, equal power to all women, which is the final chant that closed the production, I hope I recall it correctly, I couldn't possibly disassociate it from that context either. And of course, a very important quotation that I'm going to name from the text itself, the Greig version, the call of these women. They want to be protected in Argos. They seek sanctuary. Untamable Artemis, preserve us untamed. Artemis, of course, the goddess of the hunt, associated with nature. Nature is always already there. It's Artemis that guides this endeavor, this path, this quest to freedom, which is, of course, very, very complex. But so was this. I saw this production. Very few performances of this production actually happened. At the Burgtheater in Vienna in 2015, the play itself begins life in 2014 in Hamburg. And very often it's that production, the Hamburg production, that is talked about, the Schutzbefohlenen charges by Elfriede Jelinek, the Nobel Prize winning Elfriede Jelinek. So Jelinek here on home turf in Vienna has this play directed by Michael Thalheimer, and Olaf Altmann is a designer, scenographer. Context. In 2012, a group of refugees, asylum seekers, began a protest march from Traiskirchen to Vienna. They installed themselves at Sigmund Freud Park. Sigmund Freud Park is, of course, an open space, extremely close to the Burgtheater, which is the National Theatre of Austria, very close to the university, very close to one of the most important churches in Vienna, Votivkirche. So you can't possibly, and of course, commuter stations and all that, you can't possibly ignore the protest. They are out on the lawn. There is a police intervention, and they move a few weeks later inside the church, Votivkirche. This is the context of this production. You have to imagine, if you haven't been there, and trust me on this, that the Burgtheater is a very well subsidized theater that has an extraordinary amount of resources, but also a very huge stage. So this is a very deep, very long, very high, tall stage. So it's also flooded. This doesn't happen very often. In terms of reducing the distance between the story that the play tells and the spectators, a comfortable audience, an audience of means, let's say, the scenographer comes up with this extraordinary idea, and the director, which is that the element has to be brought to the spectators. So throughout the action of the play, you don't only see that extraordinarily large cross that becomes illuminated in the background. Here you see it a bit more faintly, it's as they enter, but you also see water, and actors, performers dip in and out of the water. I was there for the post-show talk. They talked about how it was more comfortable to be in the water than out, because out was cold, in was warm. So when we talk about these refugees fighting for their lives in the water, Jelinek uses these words: we have arrived and yet we're not here, invisible. They are visible, and you see their plight in a way that, of course, does not match the reality of it, but emulates at least that struggle with the water. It makes it rooted in a sea that might drown or save them. So the masks here, there were no masks in the Greig production, remember? The masks here are plastic bags, I think. That's how I read them. Strong environmental nod there from the production, stuck to their faces. They spoke perfectly in tune, perfectly coordinated. The chorus master was very close to where I was seated at the back of the stalls, and I could see the perfect coordination of all that went into this. It's an extraordinary text that thankfully does exist in translation, and I really encourage you, by Gita Honegger, to engage with it in your own time. Scale. I have a thank you slide at the end of this. A couple of years ago, I was in Delphi, invited at a conference. And there I got to experience for the first time this extraordinary space, the Archaeological Museum of Delphi. So there you see the Sphinx. And in order to understand it better, this is how tall it is. This is how high it sits. Now, as I say, I'm Greek. I'm used to certain things being present. I was not prepared for this. There is something extraordinary that happens in the presence of this statue, which is as commanding as you hope it to be when you read the Oedipus plays. And this is how I experienced it. So I tried to capture its scale. I don't know that I fully succeeded, but at least something to look at. The riddle of the Sphinx is solved by a man. It doesn't work out very well for him. So this is this remarkable production of Oedipus that's very, very new. This is very recent digging. I saw this production in February. I think I was quite lucky because I believe it sold out at the Old Vic Theatre in London. Experimentation, let's remember, can be extremely powerful in institutional spaces associated with perhaps, again, those audiences of means, those more traditional repertoires. Real disruptions can happen in those spaces. So this was one of them. The chorus here is not very verbal, not at all. It's a chorus of dancers. The opening sequence of the play is a very remarkable sequence where dancers perform the climate crisis that is described in forgive me, Ella Hickson's opening directions. And I'm going to read this. So I'm quoting Hickson, place, Thebes, 2520, sun, there is nothing, dirt and arid desert, hard, cracked ground. An unforgiving sun sits slow in the sky, giving perpetual, scorching heat. Even at night, there is no relief. Ray Smith is the designer. There is no relief and there's no water. And this is what begins the action of the play. So Oedipus as the king, you see him there, has to somehow solve this. Jocasta, his wife and mother, has to help him solve it. At this point, they don't know that they are mother and son, they're husband and wife, and they love each other very much, very tenderly. So this is the chorus, you see it. Ella Hickson, extremely important, environmentally focused contemporary playwright. Her plays, The Writer, Oil, created new paths in terms of how we think about the environment and theater, both in content and in form. So it's really important that she takes on precisely this adaptation project that becomes a beautiful amalgamation of dance and text to create something that captures moments of crisis in ways that I find are truly intersectional. So this is a production that has had its life very recently, and the text, of course, also gives you more depth in terms of the setting that Hickson envisages. So again, I'd like to encourage you to go to this production in your own time. The vibrations felt at the Old Vic in the afternoon when I experienced this show left me smiling throughout those first minutes, really, that the chorus was inhabiting the stage, because you don't expect that somehow. You don't expect that. And you don't expect necessarily to always be surprised by adaptations of plays that are so very familiar. So as I say, some of it will be in the text, some of it, if you haven't seen the production, I hope there's a recording of it somewhere, but also good to reflect on also how the collaborators of this show frame precisely their vision for it. So my aim in talking about scale is to understand the magnitudes of certain dilemmas that we face about the environment, but also about other aspects that have to do with climate justice, and gender is absolutely one of them. And geopolitics and where one is born is absolutely one of them as well. Layers of privilege, their absence. The magnitude of the crisis is important to never neglect. Things become narratives and then they're questioned with greater difficulty. So we must always question those narratives. The magnitude of the histories that connect us and their materialities. This is why I'm insisting on these photographs. So then, okay, the next part is going to be a little bit more scripted, because if I don't do this, as I say, it will become a midnight picnic, and I don't think anyone wants that. So I'm going to then crack on. I'm going to leave that here for a moment. People in the room can't see the head of Heracles, but well, almost. That's okay. So this is a statue of Heracles. This research that I'm about to present benefited greatly from periods of study at the Swedish Institute in Paris, where I got to work at the UNESCO Library in Paris, a most welcome and stimulating environment. And of course, this research that I'm about to present is a fragment of research that we're going to publish. It's my chapter in a book that's called Martin Crimp, the Writer and the Work, which is contracted and to be published by Liverpool University Press in 2026. On the occasion of, but not only because of that, Martin Crimp's 70th birthday. It's a book that I've had the great honor of co-editing with my colleague Elisabeth Angel Perez at Sorbonne University and my other colleague Clara Escoda at the University of Barcelona, both of whom I thank very warmly for providing feedback on this research, and of course for being the most amazing collaborators. So on to Martin Crimp. When Martin Crimp wrote Cruel and Tender in 2004, proceeding from Sophocles' Trachiniae, or Women of Trachis, internationally co-commissioned and directed by Luc Bondy, the predominant context was that of the War on Terror, 2004. The UK had become involved in the Iraq conflict and the anti-war sentiment was high, especially in mainland Europe. I saw the play in Vienna, where the play featured prominently, touring different European cities as part of its international premiere co-production. Nearly a decade later, when the rest will be familiar to you from cinema, Crimp's adaptation of Euripides' Phinisae, or the Phoenician Women, premiered at the Deutsche Schauspielhaus Hamburg in 2013, where it had been commissioned, directed by Katie Mitchell. The dominant narrative was migration crisis, displacement, and precariousness. For Cruel and Tender, the scenographer was Richard Peduzzi, and Alex Eels was the scenographer. For the rest will be familiar to you from cinema. Revisiting the text today, and as the dominant global crisis narrative is that of the environment, while, as we all know, at the same time, extremely serious military conflicts are raging, the intersectional dynamic of both plays, where one kind of crisis is synthesized vis-a-vis many others, means that their relevance has only increased. This is owing to the text's capacity to adapt to different environments, social, geopolitical, historical, literary, artistic, and to incentivize reflection. So, you know the plot of this play. This is Trachiniae. This was Cruel and Tender in 2004. To the left, at the top, you see Heracles, who's the general in this play, with not Hyllus, but James, that's his son. Amelia, not Deianira, is his wife in that red dress that dominates semiotically the stage. And not Iole, but Leila is the lover of the general that has been also his true incentive towards war, atrocious war and conflict. So because of an action that I describe, at some point, Amelia is attacked by her own son when he's back from the battlefield. There is a kind of relationship that forms between the two women because this real sense of solidarity of gender is developing, where Amelia cannot discard the fact that the woman that has been brought into her household as a refugee to be protected needs that protection. So even though she's the lover of her husband, has been the lover of her husband, she also operates on different levels. She's an extraordinary character. That man there, not Lichas, but Jonathan, the government minister that attempts to, in a very demagogical way, justify the actions of the general first and then bury them and disposes of him very unceremoniously, seen there in that purple shirt. And there we have a sense of the play. More scale, the Temple of Apollo in Delphi. Apollo, of course, very, very important. We know people came to the oracle to seek advice. This is where they came. This is the site where that happened. Again, the awe-inspiring feeling of encountering this 2 years ago for the first time in my life, I cannot fully capture. So from the photos that I took that day, I chose this one because it shows the nature around the site, but also the site itself. And back to Martin. So this play, the rest will be familiar to you from cinema, began life in German as Alles weitere kennen Sie aus dem Kino. It took a while for it to be published in English, quite some years. So it was first published in German because this production was in German. And Ulrike Sicha produced the text in German as translator from Crimp's text in English. So here you see, here the chorus is really important. The chorus is called The Girls. We know what's happening. They're on their way and they're intercepted by this military conflict. So they stop there in Thebes and they engage with these characters and they call them to account for their atrocities against humanity. So the plight of humanity becomes clustered in that faded palace where there's growth everywhere, overgrowth of plants, vegetation, Alex Eels, as we said, the scenographer, and you encounter all the characters of that play, but somehow they're not the protagonists. It's the chorus that is the protagonist. That's already a very important intervention by Crimp. So here you see Jocasta, and she's trying to keep her two sons away from one another, Eteocles and Polynikes. Of course, they are warring brothers. It's a civil war context. Up there, you see again the chorus, these girls that come and go. The girls, they're known as in the text, as I mentioned. So they come and go, and they repeat things, and they ask characters to go back and repeat and revisit and confess in some way, we might also say. Antigone, she was fantastic. She's really very important in this play. It's one of my very favorite parts of a text that I already really like a great deal. So when she comes in as a young person that has inherited this crisis, familial and environmental, extraordinary things happen. But why is it called The Rest Will Be Familiar to You from Cinema? Because there is a film by Pasolini, Oedipus, and it's down here. One member of the chorus is looking at the film, which is projected strategically in different moments in the production, and it's also referenced in Crimp's text. So anyway, I have spent over 20 years. I so related to the PhD 20 years ago before. I had a moment of recognition with myself as you said that. Thank you. So I have spent over 20 years researching Crimp's work, and I hope to spend many more because precisely I find its interpretative potential and resonance so rich and inexhaustible. As an environmentally focused academic, I'm focusing on these two plays, prioritizing concerns of conflict, heritage, and justice, not only military, but foremost climatic, including, of course, resource drain and forced migration. So in so doing, I will be engaging in discourses concerning environment and conflict, tracing the histories of the emergence of certain imperatives towards the safeguarding and preserving of precarious environments. Crimp's texts, revealing the primal in nature, humans, and war, serve as optimal paradigms, all the while the contextualization of scorched earth policies, by means of which entire habitats, human and non-human, are identified as fair play and targets for the exhaustion and elimination of a given enemy, set the tone for the understanding of the climates concerned. That of the plays, that's one climate, and that of the environments that the plays depict, and which can be reasonably expanded to indicate any war-ridden context that we may be reflecting on in our collective present or future. A scorched earth policy is defined by the Oxford English Dictionary as, I quote, a policy of destroying all means of sustenance or supply in a country that might be of use to an invading enemy or of orders, operation, etc., designed to affect this policy, end quote. And such is the geopolitical landscape of Cruel and Tender. So when the play opens, the general, Heracles, has been absent for a period longer than his wife Amelia is comfortable with, and she's waiting for him in a home, temporary home next to a major international airport. In a decaying marriage fraught with distrust, the general's role, which renders him a protagonist in aggressive geopolitical power plays, only deepens the schism between the couple. Landscapes of devastation abound in the play, military, environmental, physical, emotional. To expedite her husband's return, Amelia enlists their son, James, who is sent to the battlefield under protection to meet his father. And Amelia has her son forward to the general a pillow, that's the pillow he hits her with, we saw that, containing a phial with a psychotropic substance. So to Amelia's understanding, this substance causes nostalgia for home, so the general will come back sooner. But she has been misled. The substance is developed by a former lover of Amelia's, a scientist, who has misrepresented its contents for the purposes we may deduce of military sabotage. The phial, in fact, contains a destructive agent that, upon contact with the general, causes grave physical and mental harm, leaving him violently incapacitated. The general, otherwise the perpetrator of scorched earth policies, now becomes their target. His own body as ecosystem collapses with the same dramatic effects as the sites whose utter degradation he has personally and meticulously overseen. In the second part of the play, after Amelia's exit, which is followed by an offstage suicide, the general returns home, or to that home, dominating the stage. His monologues are reflective of the leadership delirium that accompanies acts of geopolitical violence, such as those that he has been responsible for, I'll show you the slide with the quotation that I'm going to ask you to reflect on and read rather than me reading it. And I want you to imagine that as we're encountering those monologues, you also see a man on stage, mostly naked, completely out of touch with the world. So the delirium is even stronger in the context of politics. So the first words that you're missing are, I have purified the world for you, slightly blocked by the Zoom, okay? I have purified the world for you. I have burned terror out of the world for people like you, tracked it by starlight across the desert, smoked it out of its cave, and the rest I'm going to leave with you for a moment. Okay, in her discussion of theater and translation, Margherita Laera reflects on military context, representation, and mediation, taking on the term for and its neighbor on behalf of. Laera engages with the semantic designation of the terms in the theater, both literally and metaphorically, in a way that invites us to ask regarding the destroyed environments that the general registers here. Could it be possible that these crimes against the non-human environment are thought of as a service to humanity, and that as a way of selectively preserving humanity's survival, the non-human world is merely treated as an inevitable casualty? The question is, of course, rhetorical. The general's erratic rhetoric combines contemporary references to military weaponry with mentions of the mythological milestones of Heracles' own journey, an intelligent nod from Crimp to the fact that both stories are profoundly interwoven with the land. Heracles is, after all, a journeying warrior, conquering as part of his mission various non-human elements and creatures in his pursuit of glory and so perceived virtue. The general's transgressions are further contextualized by the government minister Jonathan, the man in the purple shirt that you saw before, as follows, I quote, "If you want to root out terror, and I believe we all of us want to root out terror, there's only one rule, kill. We wanted that city pulverized, and I mean literally pulverized, as indeed it now has been irreversibly to dust." End quote. The city he refers to is in sub-Saharan Africa. Environmental imagery persists, never far from reference, starkly juxtaposed with the atrocities of humans against nature. Scientific methods are deployed to the maximum and worst of their capacities in this play. Returning then to Laera, I argue that Crimp's for and on behalf of also relates to theater and translation, Margherita writes in the context of translation, not only linguistic, but also cultural and cross-temporal. After all, as Laera writes, a translator speaks on behalf of an author, in their place, end quote. Crimp's role as a writer, as translator in other cases, as adapter as in these cases, and as cultural mediator further complicates the hypothesis. There are not too many cases in the theater where these cross-complementing rather than competing agencies coexist in the same artist. Crimp's extensive language range, his ear for speech, and his astute cultural interpretation render him rather unique. And so Crimp is mediating for the human audience on behalf of them, and with a view to evidencing that the human community is distinct from, but very much relies on that which it has so systematically disregarded, the non-human community. As David Wiles contends, reflecting on adaptation, revival, audiences, and time implication, we, I quote, cannot inhabit a now without thinking both backwards in time and forwards in time, end quote. If text and production do their job well, as in the cases of the plays discussed here, it should become obvious that spectators are always, already, and equally embedded in both these temporal narratives, and that that moment of our shared present to which the theater performance belongs is where our implication, also our complicity, takes flesh. As Wiles adds, I quote again, according to Aristotle, the now is what holds time together, making past and future time into a continuous whole, end quote. In order to enable spectators to perceive and experience this condition, beyond what Wiles calls the pursuit of an indivisible now, detached from past and present time, I add it is crucial to attempt, Wiles again, to penetrate the mystery of now, because the maker of theater has to work in the dimension of time, end quote. Time and timelessness, as beautifully captured in that text, are Crimp's main tools in his play. Key preoccupations, the problematics that must be made compelling for an audience. This is also why Crimp's adaptations, proceeding from the prototypical theater genre that does not date ancient Greek tragedy, are also invulnerable to time. They take on the perennial rather than the reductive specificity of the close at hand. Crimp's is not merely work that responds to the current moment, it responds to the eternal plight and its intertwinings, tracing the roots. Space, place, and atmosphere are crucial, not only regarding how these are described in Crimp's stage directions, but also in terms of the milieu and ecosystems that inform the characters' relationships to one another and to the world around them. Every important action of the plays is ultimately framed in environmental lexica and physical parameters, and it is these that set up the scene and the tone. For example, as soon as Amelia appears on stage in the early moments of Cruel and Tender, delivering a powerful opening monologue, she informs us that as years passed and she married and she became a mother, the soldier that she fell in love with is, I quote, by now the great general, and only sees his child at distant intervals, like a farmer inspecting a crop in a remote field, end quote. Devastations of one's fertile ecosystems and their resulting wastelands may occur at different yet intersecting levels. We're dealing with precarious ecologies, not only metaphorical, but also very literal. This we might describe as a legacy of romanticism, but here there is no sublime, at least not in the inspirational sense, though there is awe-inspiring landscape devastation, a reverse sublime in that sense. Different levels of colonization are also at play, leading to degradation of the human and non-human environment through war, of the human body through misappropriation of science, of others' access and agency through privilege, and of democracy and equitability by rampant patriarchal structures. Even Amelia, who is otherwise a fascinating character embodying resilience and resistance, is far from straightforward. Her agency is both formidable and catastrophic, like that of Jocasta in The Rest will be familiar to you from cinema. Amelia performs her privileged ignorant distance, for example, when she marvels to James, her son, upon his return from the battlefield. I quote, Africa sounds lovely. I hope you took photographs. I'd love to see those leaves and all those restaurants. I'd no idea. I thought it was all idleness and destruction, end quote. But it is, as we have seen, after Amelia's exit and at the point of the general's return, that the erratic references he makes fully reveal the anthropocentric arrogance that has motivated the most apocalyptic war environments, even worse, treating the act as empathy and care towards humanity. The civil war we encounter in Crimp's Euripides adaptation offers equally stark imagery. Most character names there are familiar to us from the source material, and the affected city is Thebes, but Crimp's text is infused with such contemporary references that the war in which the play's action is immersed is also transposable to different contexts of conflict. These include, of course, related narratives of toxic masculinity and transgressive systemic attitudes towards people and lands. Quote, 10,000 men, all that metal, it hurts my eyes, end quote, says Antigone as she's observing that awe-inspiring battlefield. The violence of war becomes immediately associated with prime matter and with the resources supposedly worth fighting for. Antigone's minder adjusts her angle of vision even further. The minder says to Antigone, come here and look at this. Look at the trees. Ha, they've gone. What happened? Asks Antigone. The answer comes, they've chopped them all down for firewood. When Polynices enters the scene, and as his dialogue with Jocasta unfolds, we hear him defend his strategic choices of perpetrating violence against his own city. I quote, I love my city. Those fields are my property. I've had to mutilate them with defensive earthworks, hack down the olives, strip my own orchards of fruit, end quote. A similar confrontation ensues with Eteocles, where to his relentless ambition, Jocasta responds with a reference that exposes the extent of humans' folly of domination against the rhythms of nature. As she says, I quote, and if day is prepared to leave its heat in our stone walls and welcome the night by turning the sky indigo, why can't you, Eteocles, welcome your own brother? Are you suggesting you're more important than the sun? End quote. As the play progresses and Antigone emerges as a strong agent in her own right, we encounter the most accurate assessment of the situation precisely from her. She says, Thebes is a city located between two rivers. To what does it owe its outstanding economic importance? Is it A, to investment in new technologies, B, to the cultivation of olives, or C, to copper and tin, end quote. Humans, men, in the cases of these plays mostly, appear as desperately beholden to clinging to power. Women are tuned to the catastrophic effects of that action, seeking forms of counteraction, viable alternatives. As we hear Tiresias say to Creon in the same play, I quote, "You'll remember how Cadmus founded this city by splitting open the dragon's head with a rock, or the cool stream that the Ismenus ran with strands of green weed in it? Well, the earth can't forgive him, Creon. The earth can't forgive you," end quote. It's this perspective, this environmental perspective, that the women in these plays ultimately espouse. In a trope that Crimp has also employed in other work as a mode of alluding to human arrogance and culpability in the destruction of human and non-human ecosystems, here also he draws on digital technologies to query their implications on sentience and empathy. Here, the girls, Crimp's version of the chorus, confront human hubris to ask, what did you do? Select and click. What did you delete? Was it the light? Was it the tree? Was it the magnificent Theban horses? Or was it your own human material? Well, human material is mentioned as no less likely a target of extinction than the non-human world, a disappearance self-accelerated by human-on-human violence, therefore finely tuned to the themes of Greek tragedy as enduring artistic vehicle for depicting total erasure. The vulnerability of human matter is taken on in a different tone, no longer dialectical, when Creon confronts Oedipus with this following remarkable statement, I quote, "Oedipus, I'm sorry, but I want you out. It's not personal. We all know you've suffered, but politically, you're a virus and you infect everything. Understood?" The way in which Oedipus is disposed of reminds us perhaps of the spectacular decline and ultimate disposal of the general in Cruel and Tender, that time by government operatives. Human ambition is the primary virus. Depletion of resources, its fundamental impact, and the failure to appreciate the delicate balances of ecosystems is the virus that accelerates all other viruses towards total devastation of environments, both human and not. Over the past half a century, as human impact on the environment has emerged as a major topic on the international agenda, and as warfare has continued to evolve, so institutional frameworks within which to produce counteractions have thankfully increased. As early as 1971, as part of the activities for the first United Nations Conference on the Human Environment, which would take place in Stockholm the following year, 1972, a pledge was made that the conference, I quote, "will challenge international solidarity," end quote, delivering or hoping to deliver, quote, "a turning point in the cooperation among nations," quoted from Sweden's Royal Ministry of Agriculture. Read today, the conference pledge is striking in its pragmatism, but also in its unflinching urge to collaboration, since, I quote from the same source, "the unity of the biosphere imposes a collective responsibility upon all nations to secure the ecological balance. Our responsibility involves coming generations," end quote. Terms that have more recently entered collective discourse are strikingly foregrounded here, as we note in statements, I quote, on development and environmental care. This is the early 70s. Not competing, rather they're complementing each other, end quote. And also, quote, "a more equitable distribution of a nation's resources, whereby solidarity should aim at a just distribution of the global resources among poor and rich countries," end quote. So climate justice. Such, unfortunately, has not always been the case in the half a century that followed, as both these plays continue to reveal, in terms of increasingly wider networks of cross-implication and impact. In his seminal work, Weapons of Mass Destruction in the Environment, developed within the activity framework of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Arthur H. Westing observes the following. Chemical and biological weapons have been employed from antiquity to the present, and international agreements and unilateral renunciations notwithstanding, their employment could be repeated in the future. A number of the agents are relatively inexpensive and easy to manufacture, lend themselves to a variety of overt and covert means of delivery, and are militarily effective in the sense that they directly or indirectly render an enemy or the combat out of action. This we observe especially in the substance, of course, that the general is impacted by in cruel and tender, while at the same time, Westing's epilogue might remind us that, I quote, given the capability, the belligerents in any war of the future are certain at least to consider using weapons of mass destruction, weapons that have a devastating impact on both man and nature, end quote. The military and governmental authorities of cruel and tender are precisely this kind of belligerent actor. Before the general becomes the target of those methods himself, he implements them, as we saw before, those scorched earth practices that deliver utter devastation. As the human casualties of war are commonly foregrounded in discourses on conflict, a fact that without aiming to reduce its significance has also meant that non-human environments consistently run the risk of being relegated to secondary importance, it serves to consider disarmament scholar and advocate Frank Barnaby's call for preservation. As he already notes back in that pivotal historical moment I have been discussing so far, I quote, given the present state of the world, many decades ago, my parentheses, it is essential to the future well-being of mankind that nuclear, chemical, biological, and other weapons of mass destruction be eliminated from the arsenals of the world, end quote. In a similar note, this is again Westing. Whereas concern for ecological disruption during warfare may to some appear misdirected or even callous, especially when such disruption appears to be in partial substitution for human destruction, it can be justified on a number of grounds. First, it is in the long run self-interest of the human race to protect the natural environment from which it ultimately derives its sustenance. Second, all living things deserve a measure of respect and protection in their own right. Third, an exposition of the environmental damage associated with weapons of mass destruction might serve to bolster the argument to control their use, especially so in the light of today's growing environmental awareness. And fourth, a concern over ecological consequences of war does not preclude the direct traditional human concerns. It may, in fact, enhance such concerns via a civilizing influence and also perhaps by awakening a wider public to war-related concerns. Crimp's environmentally aware sociopolitical theater creates the framework within which to expose precisely such concerns. It does so by motivating an intersectional consideration for us, spectators, regarding what we actually mean when we talk about casualties of war, and precisely how far-reaching in terms of species, as well as spatio-temporal range, the impacts of war violence are. The failures of humanity to provide protection for precarious environments and ecologies, always both human and non-human, and the problematic legacies that a combination of aggressions and inactions has bequeathed to coming generations as a concern that strongly emerges in these two plays, also invite further international policy framing and contextualization. More recently, the 2009 International Conference on Human Rights and the Environment in Tehran delivered a declaration by the UNESCO Chair for Human Rights, Peace and Democracy that, among other issues, emphasized, I quote, that respect for human rights and the environment should aim inter alia at promoting dialogue, understanding, peace, harmony, cultural diversity, and enhancement of the conservation of biological diversity, end quote. This from the UNESCO Chair of Human Rights, Peace and Democracy. This involves also the same source, quote, recognizing that the promotion of human rights includes respect for those communities whose ways of life, means of subsistence, knowledge, and practices depend directly on their local environment, end quote. In the same context, political science scholar Ole Magnus Thiessen observes, since armed conflicts result in massive human rights violations, investigation of how environmental change in general and climate change in particular could affect the risk of violent conflict is of vital importance. the potential impact of climate change on the access to fresh water, pasture, farmland, and foodstuffs, as well as increasing the severity and frequency of natural disasters, is frequently claimed to increase the risk of armed conflict. A most complex and adverse symbiosis, then, which both Cruel and Tender and the rest will be familiar to you from cinema reveal. Natural depletion causes war, and war causes environmental crisis and devastation. Such are the vicious cycles of violence against human and environment, which also prove resolutely that this is one and the same kind of violence, and that binaries cannot hold. What Crimp reveals in both plays is the hollowness of war rhetoric and the ways in which truth becomes an empty signifier when it comes to how those in positions of power present and justify their actions and policies in conflict contexts. Beyond dubious justifications of war, such rhetoric also has the impact of underplaying and even concealing the environmental impacts of military conflict. Considering then the environmental impacts of war, legal scholar Rosemary Rayfuse argues that truth, remember that, may be the first casualty of warfare, but the environment is not far behind. Since time immemorial, the environment has been a silent victim of warfare, from salting the enemy's land to poisoning water sources to scorched earth policies. The environment has historically been both target and weapon. It has suffered both deliberate and incidental damage, and it has suffered not only during but also in preparation for and in the aftermath of armed conflict. Moreover, the environmental consequences of armed conflict are well documented. Air, soil, and water pollution, as well as you can't see that's great, as well as habitat and species destruction, destroy ecosystems and the ecosystem services upon which humans depend for their health and well-being. This destruction is expensive and sometimes irreversible. Livelihoods are undermined, resulting in poverty and forced migration. Both Cruel and Tender and the rest will be familiar to you from cinema take on forced migration as direct outcome of the unsustainability of war-ravaged territories. Whether we consider Cruel and Tender and the character of Layla, herself a victim of the general's hegemonic gendered military transgressions, and the young boy that accompanies her, and that are brought to live in Amelia's home as a result of the general's actions, or the rest will be familiar to you from cinema and the girls, the chorus of young women in transit across time and space, representing the disenfranchised majority that most directly suffers the consequences of war. The hypothesis cross-checks. Towards a conclusion. As my great PhD colleague once upon a time, Rachel Clemens, discusses, with reference to Cruel and Tender, in one of the first very beautiful texts to write about the play from this kind of perspective, I cite Rachel, "The images of pulverizing and of dust connect the ancient world and the modern, as Hesiod's prediction from antiquity echoes in the play's present." End the quote. The Hesiod reference that Clemens mentions is taken up in the play's very final moments. It refers to Layla reading from Hesiod's work and Days and concentrating on the phrase that Clemens also cites. I quote, "Men will turn the cities of other men to dust with no reason," end quote. For all of humanity's histories, and presumably the learning that comes with these, the human instinct and design to annihilate the non-human environment as primary war strategy lingers. Another great colleague, Emma Cole, who has written about these adaptations also very beautifully in her book. So Emma Cole's observation in relation to the rest will be familiar to you from cinema, namely that the play takes on, I quote, "how we use antiquity to construct our own identity and how tragedy can be used to consider contemporary power disputes and issues of nationalism," end quote, is likewise entirely accurate. Crimp's palette is as diverse as it is consistent. Our identity as humans, both these plays reveal, is not extrinsic to non-human nature, and yet across time, one of the few constants, especially in contexts of conflict, has been humans' precise transgressions upon nature in the name of power. Theater can teach history very well, even without doing messages or instruction. Crimp's plays take on established narratives, from their formation to their questioning, through stage poetry, and through dialectical rigor, and in so doing, they incentivize the spectator to proceed similarly. Such is ultimately the sentience and prescience of Martin Crimp's theater as it leans into ancient Greek drama almost at the end. They're not in the museum now. Now they're in a much more public space, photographed as art installation in the underground station Museo in Naples. The Danaids again, the dancers. Who are these women? What are those long shadows of history behind them? Where are they going? As all plays discussed today emphatically show, meriting therefore, I argue, ample revivals, no issue as complex as the environment and war can be probed in the theater or in any other form of literary and artistic representation through one single dominant methodological angle. We need to, if I may paraphrase Jameson, not only always historicize, but indeed always intersectionalize. And although Greek tragedy provides us with good tools and solid structures, we also need to listen in and engage with these boldly in revivals and adaptations, precisely so as to emphatically reveal with each new staging the enduring relevance of Greek tragedy afresh. Thanks very much.